There is something profoundly revealing about a man who thinks about you constantly but never puts it into words. His silence isn't emptiness. It's containment. It's the quiet discipline of someone trying to manage emotions that feel larger than he expected. Many people assume that if someone is thinking about you day and night, it would be obvious. They imagine non-stop messages, dramatic confessions, or bold declarations, but real emotional fixation rarely looks like that. More often, it appears as restraint, as pauses, as moments where his actions speak louder than anything he's willing to say out loud. A man who thinks about you deeply doesn't always chase. Sometimes he watches. He observes. He measures his responses carefully because part of him knows that once he admits how often you cross his mind, he gives up control. And for many men, control feels safer than vulnerability. Yet no matter how composed he tries to be, his inner world leaks through in subtle, unmistakable ways. His energy shifts, his behavior changes, his presence around you feels charged, even when his words remain neutral. What most people miss is this: thinking about someone constantly doesn't always create confidence. Often, it creates caution. The more emotionally significant you become, the more careful he becomes with you. That's why the signs aren't loud. They're quiet, psychological, and deeply human. When you learn to recognize them, everything starts to make sense. You stop guessing. You stop doubting yourself. You begin to see the emotional truth beneath the surface. Today, we're going to explore 7 powerful signs that reveal when a man is thinking about you day and night, even if he never says it. This isn't about forcing clarity or trying to extract a confession. It's about understanding emotional reality. When someone occupies a man's thoughts consistently, his mind and body respond whether he wants them to or not. And once you understand how this shows up, you'll never confuse indifference with restraint again. The first sign is subtle but unmistakable once you notice it. His attention gravitates toward you, even when he pretends it doesn't. You may find that no matter what's happening around him, he seems unusually aware of you. He notices when your mood shifts. He remembers details you mentioned casually, without emphasis. He picks up on changes in your tone or energy before others do. This isn't coincidence. When someone is thinking about you frequently, their mind becomes attuned to you. You become a reference point. What's interesting is that he may not act on this awareness directly. Instead, it shows up in small unconscious behaviors. He might pause slightly when you speak, as if giving your words extra weight. He might glance at you during group conversations, checking your reaction before responding himself. Sometimes he'll even mirror your expressions or body language without realizing it. Psychologically, this happens when someone's emotional focus narrows. You occupy mental space, so his subconscious keeps tracking you, even when his conscious mind is trying to stay neutral. If he weren't thinking about you, his attention would be diffuse, casual. But when you're on his mind regularly, his awareness sharpens around you. He doesn't need to stare or flirt overtly. The consistency of his attention is the tell. He's mentally present with you in a way that feels intentional, even if he never acknowledges it. This is often the first crack in the emotional armor. The second sign is that he finds reasons to insert you into his everyday thoughts. You'll notice it in the way he reaches out without a clear purpose. A short message, a shared song, a comment like, "This reminded me of you." These interactions aren't dramatic, and that's exactly the point. When a man thinks about you constantly, his mind looks for safe outlets to express that connection without exposing how deep it runs. He may frame these moments as casual or friendly, but psychologically they serve a deeper function. They allow him to maintain emotional proximity. Thinking about someone day and night creates a sense of internal closeness, and reaching out helps align his external reality with that internal state. It's a way of saying, "I'm here," without saying, "You're on my mind all the time." What makes this especially telling is the timing. He might reach out during quiet moments, late evenings, or random parts of the day when nothing obvious prompted the contact. That's when thoughts surface most naturally. When there's no distraction, the mind returns to what matters. If you find yourself appearing in those unguarded moments, it's because you're already there mentally. The third sign is emotional fluctuation around you. This is one of the most misunderstood indicators, yet one of the strongest. A man who thinks about you constantly often struggles to maintain emotional equilibrium in your presence. One moment he may feel warm, engaged, and relaxed. The next, he becomes distant or reserved. This isn't manipulation, it's regulation. Thinking about someone deeply can create an internal conflict. A part of him wants closeness, another part wants safety. When those forces collide, his behavior can feel inconsistent. He's not unsure about you. He's unsure about what his feelings mean for his sense of control. Distance becomes a way to regain balance when emotions feel too intense. This push and pull often intensifies the more he thinks about you. When you're emotionally neutral to someone, there's no need to regulate. But when someone occupies your thoughts repeatedly, their presence carries emotional weight. His shifts aren't random. They're responses to internal pressure. If you notice that his distance often follows moments of connection, it's a sign that being close to you activates something he hasn't fully resolved. The fourth sign shows up in how he reacts when your attention moves elsewhere. This doesn't always look like jealousy in the traditional sense. It's quieter, more controlled. You might notice a subtle change in his tone when you mention another man, a slight withdrawal, a joking comment that carries tension beneath it. These reactions aren't about possession. They're about emotional investment. When someone thinks about you day and night, the idea of you connecting deeply with someone else creates internal discomfort. Even if he believes he has no claim, he may not express it openly because that would require acknowledging how much he cares. Instead, the feeling leaks through in micro-reactions, a pause, a lowered voice, a momentary seriousness that wasn't there before. What's important to understand is that this response isn't strategic, it's instinctive. His mind has already placed you in a significant emotional category, so threats to that bond register on a subconscious level. Even if he tells himself he has no right to feel anything, his nervous system reacts before logic can intervene. That's why these moments often feel charged, even when nothing explicit is said. The fifth sign is that he listens to you with a level of depth that feels personal. When a man thinks about you constantly, he doesn't just hear what you say, he absorbs it. He remembers your preferences, your stories, your worries. He brings them up later, sometimes weeks or months after you mentioned them, as if they quietly mattered to him all along. This kind of listening isn't performative, it's reflective. When someone occupies your thoughts frequently, your brain naturally stores information about them more deeply. You replay conversations. You recall details. You connect dots. If he references things you didn't expect him to remember, it's because his mind revisits you when you're not there. Listening becomes his way of staying close. It allows him to feel connected without crossing boundaries he's not ready to cross. In many ways, this is one of the most intimate signs of all. Attention is a form of energy, and sustained attention reveals sustained thought. You don't listen deeply to someone you're emotionally neutral about. The sixth sign appears most clearly when you're not around. Pay attention to how he behaves after periods of closeness. If you notice him becoming quieter, more withdrawn, or suddenly busy, it's not because his interest disappeared. It's often the opposite. Distance becomes a tool for emotional recalibration. When a man thinks about you day and night, moments of separation can amplify the connection rather than diminish it. Your absence creates space for his thoughts to echo. He replays interactions. He reflects on how he felt around you. Sometimes that intensity feels overwhelming, especially if he hasn't decided what to do with it yet. So he pulls back, not to forget you, but to manage the feeling. During this time, you may still notice subtle signs of connection. He checks your social media. He responds quickly when you do reach out. He never fully disappears. That's because mentally he hasn't gone anywhere. He's just trying to quiet the noise inside his own head. This is where many people misinterpret silence. They assume it means loss of interest. In reality, silence can be a sign of internal processing. The more emotionally significant you are, the more he needs space to make sense of what you represent in his life. The seventh and most powerful sign is this: he associates emotional calm with you. This is the moment where thinking turns into attachment. When a man thinks about you day and night, you become more than a thought. You become a feeling. Specifically, a feeling of grounding. He may not describe it this way, but being around you brings him a sense of ease. His nervous system settles. His guard lowers. Even if the connection feels intense, it also feels safe. Over time, his mind begins to link that calm with you. When he's stressed, distracted, or overwhelmed, thoughts of you surface naturally because they restore balance. This is why he may return after periods of distance with a softer tone. Why his messages feel more genuine. Why he checks in without agenda. He's drawn back not by desire alone, but by regulation. You've become a place his mind goes when it wants relief. At this stage, he may still not verbalize his feelings, not because they aren't real, but because they've grown too significant to handle lightly. Thinking about you has become part of his emotional landscape. You're woven into his routines, his reflections, his quiet moments. And once that happens, words feel inadequate. Understanding these signs isn't about waiting or hoping. It's about clarity. When you recognize that someone is thinking about you deeply, you no longer need to chase reassurance. You stop reading silence as rejection. You trust your perception, and that confidence shifts the dynamic naturally. What matters most is how you respond to this energy. Not with pressure, not with demands, but with steadiness. Emotional groundedness is what allows these feelings to surface safely. When you remain calm and self-contained, you give him space to move toward you rather than retreat from himself. A man who thinks about you day and night is already emotionally engaged, whether he admits it or not. The connection is happening internally. Your role isn't to force it into words, but to maintain your own center. When you do that, clarity follows on its own timeline. The deepest truth is this: constant thought is rarely accidental. Minds return to what matters. Hearts linger where they feel something real. And when you understand how that shows up, you no longer question your impact. You simply recognize it. You don't need to be louder, more available, or more convincing. Presence is enough. Awareness is enough. When someone is thinking about you this deeply, the connection is already alive. It's unfolding quietly, exactly as it needs to. And once you learn to see it, you'll never mistake silence for absence again. When you understand this dynamic, something important shifts inside you. You stop measuring connection by volume. You stop equating desire with noise. You begin to recognize that the most powerful emotions often move silently, shaping behavior from underneath rather than announcing themselves. A man who thinks about you day and night doesn't always know how to integrate that reality into his actions immediately. But his inner world reorganizes around you long before his words ever catch up. This is why his presence around you can feel different from how he is with others. There's a subtle gravity there. Conversations slow down. Eye contact lasts just a bit longer. Even silence between you feels weighted, not empty. That's because when someone occupies your thoughts consistently, your nervous system recognizes them as significant. Your body reacts before your mind decides what to do. He may not articulate it, but he feels it, and so do you. One of the quiet confirmations of this is how he responds to your emotional state. If you're tired, he softens. If you're distant, he becomes attentive. If you're joyful, he mirrors it effortlessly. This isn't coincidence or politeness, it's attunement. When someone is thinking about you frequently, they become emotionally calibrated to you. Your moods matter because you matter. Even when he doesn't intervene or comment, he registers the shift and adjusts himself around it. This level of awareness doesn't come from casual interest. It comes from repeated mental engagement, from replaying conversations, from wondering how you're feeling when you're not there, from imagining your reactions. Thinking about someone day and night builds an internal model of them, and once that model exists, it shapes behavior automatically. That's why his reactions may feel instinctive rather than deliberate. Another sign that often goes unnoticed is how he protects the connection without labeling it. He may avoid situations that could compromise the dynamic between you. He may be selective about what he shares with others about you. He keeps things vague, not because he doesn't care, but because he does. When something feels emotionally important, people tend to guard it. Naming it too soon feels risky, as if speaking it aloud could destabilize what he's still trying to understand. This protective instinct is especially strong in men who value emotional control. For them, thinking about someone constantly can feel disorienting. It disrupts routine. It challenges identity. So instead of leaning into it openly, they manage it quietly. They hold the connection carefully, as if keeping it contained will make it easier to handle. But containment doesn't erase the feeling. It only delays expression. You might also notice that he becomes more thoughtful in his interactions with you. He chooses his words carefully. He pauses before responding. He avoids saying things he might say casually to others. This isn't distance. It's consideration. When someone is thinking about you deeply, they don't want to misstep. They're aware that what they say carries weight, because you carry weight. Even light conversations take on a layer of significance. This is where many people misread caution as lack of interest. In reality, caution often increases with emotional investment. The more someone matters, the more intentional behavior becomes. If he weren't thinking about you, he'd be relaxed in a different way, less present, less careful. Emotional weight changes the tone of interaction, even when nothing explicit is discussed. There's also a noticeable difference in how he handles conflict or misunderstanding with you. If tension arises, he doesn't dismiss it easily. Even if he withdraws, the issue lingers for him. He thinks about what was said, what was meant, what could have been handled differently. When someone occupies your thoughts, unresolved moments don't fade quickly. They replay, they ask for resolution, even if that resolution happens internally before it ever becomes a conversation. This mental revisiting is a key indicator. People don't replay interactions with those who are emotionally insignificant. The mind conserves energy. It returns only to what feels unfinished or meaningful. If you find that moments between you seem to linger for him, it's because they matter more than he lets on. Over time, this pattern creates a quiet consistency. Even if his presence ebbs and flows, there's a reliability beneath it. He returns, he checks in, he remembers, he responds with familiarity rather than formality. This consistency doesn't demand attention, but it's there if you know how to see it. It's the thread that doesn't break, even when communication slows. At this point, it's important to understand something crucial. None of these signs require you to wait, to hope, or to put your life on hold. Awareness is not passivity, it's clarity. When you recognize that someone is thinking about you this deeply, you gain freedom rather than attachment. You stop over-functioning. You stop filling silence with effort. You let the connection breathe. The paradox is that this groundedness often invites more openness from him. When he senses that you're not trying to extract certainty, his nervous system relaxes, pressure dissolves, emotional safety increases, and when safety increases, expression becomes possible. Not always immediately, but inevitably. Feelings that are allowed space tend to surface. What matters most is that you don't abandon yourself in the process. A man thinking about you day and night doesn't define your worth. It reflects it. Your value exists independently of his awareness, but his awareness is shaped by the energy you carry, calm, presence, authenticity. These qualities don't chase attention, they draw it naturally. When you embody this, you stop interpreting every pause as a problem. You stop personalizing distance. You trust the connection without clinging to it. And that trust changes the dynamic entirely. It shifts the interaction from uncertainty to quiet confidence. Eventually, something else becomes clear. Thinking about someone constantly isn't sustainable without movement. The mind seeks alignment between inner experience and outer reality. If he continues to think about you day and night, a decision will form. Expression may come in words, or it may come in actions that speak just as clearly. But clarity arrives because the internal pressure demands it. Until then, your role isn't to accelerate the process, it's to remain steady, to live fully, to stay connected to yourself. When you do that, you're not waiting, you're allowing. And allowing is powerful because it doesn't resist truth. It lets truth emerge naturally. The deeper message here isn't about decoding men, it's about trusting perception. Emotional intelligence isn't about control, it's about recognition. When you learn to recognize the signs of deep thought and unspoken attachment, you stop doubting what you feel. You stop outsourcing your intuition to uncertainty. A man who thinks about you day and night is already emotionally involved. Whether he names it or not, the connection exists, and when you understand that you no longer need to search for proof, you simply observe the consistency beneath the surface. Silence becomes informative, not alarming. Distance becomes context, not rejection. Presence becomes meaningful, not accidental. And you move through the connection with clarity instead of confusion. This is what emotional awareness offers. Not answers forced into words, but understanding that settles in the body. When you have that, you don't need reassurance. You recognize resonance when it's there. And that recognition changes everything. When you reach this level of understanding, relationships stop feeling like puzzles you have to solve. They begin to feel like experiences you can sense. You no longer analyze every interaction for hidden meaning because you recognize the pattern beneath it. Thinking about someone day and night leaves an imprint. It shapes behavior over time, even when that behavior appears restrained on the surface. You start to notice that his consistency isn't always loud, but it's steady. He may not be constant in communication, but there's a familiarity in how he reconnects. He doesn't reset to zero, he resumes. That alone speaks volumes. Emotional neutrality doesn't resume, it resets. Emotional attachment picks up where it left off. If he returns with the same warmth, the same ease, the same attentiveness, it's because mentally, the connection never stopped running. Another quiet indicator is how he reacts to your boundaries. When a man is thinking about you deeply, he becomes more respectful of your emotional space, not less. He pays attention to what makes you comfortable. He adjusts without making a spectacle of it. This isn't fear. It's regard. Your comfort matters because your presence matters. People don't adapt themselves for those they don't think about. You might also notice that he values your opinion in ways that feel disproportionate to the level of connection he openly acknowledges. He seeks your perspective. He listens carefully when you speak about things that matter to him. He may not ask directly, but he notices your reactions. Approval from someone you think about constantly carries more weight. It feels personal. It feels affirming. And even if he never articulates it, your view of him begins to matter. This is where internal attachment becomes visible. When someone's thoughts orbit around you, their sense of self subtly reorganizes in relation to you. They imagine how you'd see certain choices. They consider how you'd feel about certain actions. This doesn't happen consciously at first. It happens because the mind integrates what it returns to most often. You become part of his internal dialogue. There's also a noticeable softness that emerges over time. Even if he's guarded, even if he maintains composure, there are moments when that guard drops unexpectedly. A look that lingers, a moment of sincerity that feels unfiltered, a comment that reveals more than he intended. These moments aren't planned. They slip through because thinking about someone consistently weakens the walls meant to contain feeling. When that happens, he may retreat afterward, not because the moment wasn't real, but because it was. Vulnerability often triggers self-correction in people who aren't used to emotional exposure. He reasserts control, not by disconnecting emotionally, but by reducing visible access. The feeling doesn't disappear, it simply goes quiet again. This cycle can repeat several times before anything is spoken aloud. Each time, the emotional bond deepens, even if the external situation looks unchanged. That's because repetition reinforces meaning. Every return confirms significance. Every pullback confirms intensity. Over time, the internal narrative shifts from curiosity to attachment. What's important here is that none of this requires you to interpret every signal in real time. Emotional intelligence isn't about constant monitoring. It's about recognizing patterns over time. A man who thinks about you day and night will show continuity. His presence may fluctuate, but his interest doesn't evaporate. It settles. It integrates. As you observe this, you may notice something else happening within yourself. Your urgency fades. You feel less compelled to seek validation. You stop filling gaps with assumptions. That's because clarity creates calm. When you understand what's happening beneath the surface, you no longer need immediate answers. You trust the process without surrendering your sense of self. This is where real power lies, not in controlling outcomes, but in remaining grounded regardless of them. A man's unspoken thoughts don't define you. But when you're aware of them, you move differently. You're less reactive, more present, more selective about where you invest energy. Ironically, this grounded presence often accelerates emotional honesty. When pressure dissolves, authenticity has room to emerge. When someone feels that their feelings don't need to be managed or defended, they become easier to express. Silence becomes less necessary. Words begin to form, and if they don't, that clarity still serves you. Because understanding emotional reality allows you to choose from a place of strength rather than confusion. You no longer wait for permission to feel secure. You carry that security with you. The deeper truth is that thinking about someone constantly creates momentum. It's not static. It moves toward resolution, whether that resolution is connection or release. Minds seek coherence. Hearts seek alignment. If he continues to think about you day and night, something will eventually shift. Until then, your steadiness is enough. Your awareness is enough. You don't need to interpret every silence as a test. You don't need to chase expression. You simply remain present in your own life, allowing what's real to reveal itself naturally. This is the difference between emotional awareness and emotional anxiety. Awareness trusts what it observes. Anxiety tries to control what it doesn't understand. When you operate from awareness, you don't lose yourself in someone else's inner world. You stay anchored in your own. And that's what makes any connection meaningful. Two grounded people meeting, not two anxious minds circling each other. When you hold that energy, you don't need certainty to feel secure. You carry it with you. A man who thinks about you day and night may never announce it dramatically, but his mind will keep returning to you until alignment happens. And when you recognize that, you stop waiting for proof. You recognize presence when it's there. That recognition brings peace, and peace is the clearest signal of all. There's a quiet confidence that settles in when you no longer need to interpret every moment for reassurance. You begin to move through the connection with ease, not because you know exactly what will happen, but because you understand what already is. When someone thinks about you day and night, the truth exists regardless of whether it's spoken. Words don't create the feeling. They simply reveal what has already taken root. At this stage, you may notice that his behavior toward you becomes more intentional over time. He may not escalate dramatically, but there's a sense of deliberateness in how he shows up. He chooses moments carefully. He reaches out when it feels meaningful, not impulsive. This is often mistaken for hesitation, but in reality it reflects depth. When emotions are shallow, actions are careless. When emotions run deep, actions become measured. You'll also notice that he doesn't disappear emotionally, even when life gets busy. There's a difference between absence and disengagement. A man who isn't thinking about you fades into the background easily. A man who is thinking about you constantly maintains an emotional thread, even when circumstances pull him away. You feel the difference. The connection doesn't feel interrupted, it feels paused. Another subtle sign is how he responds to your growth or independence. Rather than feeling threatened, he becomes quietly supportive. He respects your autonomy. He doesn't try to shrink your world to keep his place in it. That's because when someone thinks about you deeply, they don't need to control you to feel connected. The bond exists internally. Your independence doesn't weaken it, it often strengthens it. This is where emotional maturity becomes visible. Thinking about someone day and night doesn't always translate into possessiveness. Often, it creates admiration. He sees you as someone whole, not someone to be managed. That respect is a direct result of internal attachment. You matter enough to be honored, not claimed prematurely. Over time, this internal focus reshapes how he experiences other connections. Conversations with others feel flatter. Interactions lack the same resonance. He may not articulate this contrast, but he feels it. When the mind becomes accustomed to a certain emotional frequency, anything less feels noticeable. This doesn't mean he withdraws from the world. It means he recognizes where emotional depth lies. This is also why moments with you may feel unusually present. He's more attentive, less distracted, more engaged. When someone occupies your thoughts consistently, being with them feels grounding. The noise quiets, the focus sharpens. Even ordinary moments take on significance because they're shared with someone who already lives in your mind. Eventually, this sustained internal attention creates a turning point. Not always sudden, but inevitable. The mind can only hold so much unexpressed feeling before it seeks resolution. That resolution might come as a conversation. It might come as a shift in behavior that leaves no doubt. Or it might come as a realization that changes how he approaches you entirely. What's important is that this process doesn't require you to do anything differently. It unfolds based on emotional truth, not strategy. When you remain grounded, you allow that truth to surface without distortion. You don't rush it. You don't resist it. You let it reveal itself in its own time. And if at any point clarity doesn't come, that awareness still serves you. Because understanding that someone thinks about you deeply doesn't obligate you to wait. It simply informs you. It gives you context. It allows you to choose your path from a place of calm rather than confusion. This is the essence of emotional intelligence. Not chasing certainty, but recognizing reality. Not demanding expression, but understanding behavior. When you move from this place, relationships stop feeling like emotional labor. They become mutual experiences, shaped by awareness and respect. A man who thinks about you day and night is already connected to you in ways that matter. Whether that connection evolves into something more is less important than knowing it exists. Because once you know, you stop questioning your impact. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain connection. You stay rooted in who you are. And that rootedness is powerful. It shifts dynamics without effort. It invites honesty without pressure. It creates space for real connection to emerge. In the end, the most meaningful relationships aren't built on declarations alone. They're built on consistency, presence, and emotional truth. When someone's thoughts return to you again and again, that truth is already in motion. You don't need to force it into words. You don't need to decode every silence. You simply recognize what's there and trust yourself enough to respond with clarity and grace. That's when connection becomes peaceful. And peace, more than intensity, is what lasts. When you hold this understanding, you stop feeling like you're standing on unstable ground. There's a quiet steadiness that comes from knowing you're not imagining the depth of the connection. Thinking about someone day and night leaves traces. And once you learn how to see them, you don't need constant reassurance. You trust what's unfolding because you understand how human emotions actually work beneath the surface. At this point, you may notice that his curiosity about you deepens in subtle ways. He asks questions that aren't surface level. He wants to understand how you think, how you see the world, what shapes your decisions. These questions aren't interrogations. They're invitations. When someone occupies your thoughts consistently, you don't just want their presence. You want their inner world. You want to know what makes them who they are. This curiosity often appears quietly. He may reference past conversations and build on them. He may connect ideas you shared weeks ago to something happening now. This shows that your presence hasn't been fleeting in his mind. It's been integrated. You're not a moment he passed through. You're a theme that keeps returning. You might also notice that he becomes more emotionally honest in indirect ways. Even if he doesn't name his feelings for you, he may open up about other areas of his life. He shares frustrations, doubts, or personal stories he doesn't often reveal. This is significant. Emotional openness rarely exists in isolation. When someone feels safe thinking about you, they often feel safe revealing themselves around you. This doesn't mean he suddenly becomes vulnerable all at once. It happens gradually, in layers, a sentence here, a confession there, each one signals trust. And trust grows most easily with someone who already occupies the mind as a place of comfort and understanding. Another quiet sign is how he reacts when you pull back slightly. not in a dramatic way, but in subtle shifts of availability or energy. If he's thinking about you constantly, he feels that absence immediately. He may not confront it, he may not comment on it, but you'll notice an adjustment. He reaches out more intentionally. He becomes more present when you do connect. That responsiveness reveals how attuned he is to your presence in his life. What's important here is that this isn't about testing or creating distance. It's about awareness. When someone's thoughts are anchored to you, even small changes register. Emotional attachment sharpens perception. He notices when something feels different, even if he can't explain why. Over time, this creates a quiet alignment. Your conversations feel easier. There's less performative energy, less need to impress. The connection feels natural, almost familiar. That familiarity isn't boredom, it's comfort. It's what happens when someone has already spent time with you mentally. When they've imagined conversations, replayed moments, and considered you in their private world. This is why time with you may feel oddly grounding for him. Even if he's usually restless or distracted, around you he slows down, his attention settles, he's more present. Thinking about someone day and night trains the mind to associate them with a certain emotional state. Often, that state is calm, relief, a sense of being understood without effort. As this association deepens, it becomes harder for him to ignore. Thoughts of you surface automatically during moments of stress or uncertainty. Your presence becomes a mental anchor. And when someone becomes an anchor, they're no longer just a desire, they're a source of stability. At this stage, his restraint isn't about lack of feeling. It's about respect for the weight of what he feels. He knows that naming it would change the dynamic. He senses that once spoken, there's no going back to neutrality. So he waits, he observes. He allows the feeling to exist internally while he decides how to meet it externally. This waiting period can feel confusing from the outside, but internally it's active. His mind is working through what you represent in his life. Not just attraction, but impact. How you make him feel. How you affect his sense of self. How being connected to you changes his emotional landscape. Understanding this allows you to remain patient without becoming passive. You don't suspend your life. You don't shrink your needs. You simply don't rush what's already in motion. You let emotional truth take its natural course. And here's the quiet power in that. When you don't force clarity, clarity often finds you. When you don't chase expression, expression becomes safer. When you remain grounded, you create the conditions for honesty to emerge. Even if words never come, the awareness still transforms you. You stop interpreting every silence as a verdict. You stop assigning meaning based on fear. You read behavior with discernment rather than anxiety. And that shift alone changes how you experience connection. A man thinking about you day and night is already emotionally engaged. That engagement doesn't require your validation to exist. It's happening because something about you resonates deeply with him. And resonance doesn't fade easily. It leaves an imprint. When you know this, you move with grace. You respond instead of react. You observe instead of assume. You trust yourself enough to let things unfold. And that trust is what ultimately brings peace. Peace doesn't come from answers alone. It comes from understanding, from recognizing patterns, from knowing when something is real, even if it's quiet. This is how you stop second-guessing your intuition. You stop needing confirmation from words. You see the emotional truth expressed through consistency, presence, and subtle shifts that can't be faked. And once you see that, you don't feel the need to chase what's already drawn to you. You simply remain who you are, knowing that what's meant to move toward you will do so in its own time. That's the difference between waiting and allowing. Waiting feels anxious. Allowing feels calm. And calm is the clearest sign that you understand what's really happening. Because when someone thinks about you day and night, the connection is already alive. And recognizing that truth frees you from doubt, from urgency, and from the need to force anything into existence. You don't need to prove your value. You don't need to demand clarity. You trust the process because you trust yourself, and that trust changes everything. At the end of all of this, what matters most isn't whether he ever finds the perfect words. It's whether you understand the truth beneath the silence. When a man thinks about you day and night, his inner world has already shifted. His thoughts return to you in moments of stillness. His emotions reorganize around the way you make him feel. And whether he names it now or later, that imprint doesn't disappear easily. The mistake many people make is believing that clarity must always come through confession. But emotional truth often reveals itself long before it's spoken. It shows up in presence that doesn't fade, in attention that feels personal, in consistency that survives distance. When you learn to recognize these signs, you stop needing proof. You trust what you perceive because it aligns over time. This understanding brings you back to yourself. You no longer wait in uncertainty or interpret silence as a reflection of your worth. You move forward grounded, aware, and emotionally intact. If he steps closer, you meet him with openness. If he takes time, you remain steady. Either way, you don't abandon your center. That's the quiet power of emotional intelligence. It doesn't demand answers. It recognizes patterns. It doesn't chase reassurance. It trusts reality. And when you live from that place, connections unfold naturally. The right ones deepen. The unclear ones resolve. And you remain whole throughout the process. A man who thinks about you day and night may never say it exactly the way you expect, but his mind will keep returning to you until something aligns. And when it does, you'll recognize it not because of what he says, but because of how it feels. Calm, certain, grounded. You don't need to force that moment. You don't need to wait for it either. You simply continue living in your truth, knowing that genuine connection doesn't require convincing. It recognizes itself. And when you carry that awareness with you, you stop questioning who values you. You stop wondering where you stand. You move with clarity instead of doubt, because the deepest connections aren't built on constant words. They're built on presence, consistency, and emotional truth. And when someone's thoughts keep finding their way back to you, that truth is already alive. You don't chase it. You don't rush it. You trust it. And that's where real peace begins.